So, welcome to Interfaith Interconnect Religion Chat. And I think everybody knows that I am Marcia Elchison, and I'm the leadership coordinator of Interfaith Interconnect. And do we have anyone attending Religion Chat for the first time? All right. Welcome. Interfaith Interconnect holds Religion Chat on the second Wednesday of many months. We haven't had an in-person religion chat, though, for several months. So you never know how many people are coming, and we're always happy to see whoever comes. As is our custom, I'll begin the program with our Interfaith Interconnect's mission statement, which is to enrich, inform, and educate ourselves and each other about the great diversity of faiths and cultures in our valley. Today's presentation on meditation practices in different faiths is entitled From Inner Silence to Universal Oneness, the Emergence of Hinduism from Meditation. And I'm happy to introduce our presenter, Gaurav Rastogi. He's presented on many topics for us at Religion Chat events over the last 6 years. And last summer, he organized a tour of the Shiva Vishnu Hindu temple in Livermore for Interfaith Interconnect members and their families. So following Gaurav's presentation, he'll also allow some time for questions. And we'll plan to wrap up here shortly before 6 o'clock. And I'll have a few announcements about some upcoming events at that time. So now please welcome.
Namaste, my name is Gaurav Rastogi. Thank you, Marcia. It's always a pleasure to be here in this group. This is a participatory talk. So we're going to participate and experience the entire talk together with your permission. I live here in Dublin, and I've been teaching meditation for a good part of 15 years. I run the Hindu, I'm one of the founders of the Hindu Spiritual Care Institute in Milpitas, and we run a global spiritual care program as well. And as part of the Tri-Valley Interfaith, I'm often invited to attend and give talks every once in a while, always a pleasure. And again, this summer, if you'd like to do a temple visit, I'd be happy to have everyone. Last time it was a really busy day at the temple, so it turned out to be very overwhelming because there was a lot going on. Lots of people, lots of color, lots of things going on. Hinduism is a very singing, dancing, celebratory religion. And so there's a lot going on all the time. And today we're going in the exact opposite direction. We're going to go into meditative silence. And I'd like to talk to you about how all the singing and dancing and forms that you see in the Hindu tradition comes from the silence. And so we're going to begin with that. I'll play the conch shell and just take in the sound. And then we're going to look at the avocado because I brought some fruit along. And we're going to see if we can try to ripen it with hot powder. We'll see. All right. And just sit comfortably. Sit with your back straight. You can just lean back. Close your eyes gently. Close your eyes gently. Sit with the back straight. The back, neck, and head are in a straight line. Lean back just a little so you can just relax. The eyes are closed gently and relax the expression on the face. Relax your shoulders. Relax your belly. Just relax. I'm going to play this very loud sound, so just brace yourself. And then just listen to the sound and just feel its vibration. And then we'll descend into silence for a few minutes. Silence. That was loud. Sitting in silence. Sit comfortably. Being comfortable is very important. So do what you need to stay comfortable. Feet in full contact with the floor below, if your feet are on the floor. Not bouncing, not on the heels or balls of your feet. Just relax. Relax your feet. Let the entire weight of the body press into the chair and through the chair into the floor below. The back is straight but not stiff. The back, neck, and head are in a straight line. The eyes are gently closed. Let the tongue become heavy and fall down to the bottom of the mouth. Let the relaxation in the tongue travel to the back of the tongue, into the throat, into the chest, and now into the belly. As you inhale, now breathe into the belly and let the belly expand. Breathe in completely into the belly and exhale comfortably. No need to rush it. Breathe into the belly and let the belly expand. As you exhale, let go. Imagining those helium balloons that when you let them go, they float away into the bright blue sky. As you exhale, let go of your thoughts. Breathing into the belly, let the belly expand. As you exhale, let go of your preoccupations, floating away. Breathing into the belly, let the belly expand. As you exhale, let everything go and feel a sense of relief sweep through the body. Slow the breath down a little. Slow the breath down. Still breathing into the belly. Bring your attention to the tip of the nose. As you breathe in, observe the incoming breath. As you exhale, observe the outgoing breath. Stay right here at the tip of the nose. Stay at the tip of the nose, observing the incoming breath and the outgoing breath. As you inhale, observe your anticipation rising. As you exhale, feel a sense of relief sweep through the body. Thoughts will come, thoughts will go. Pay no attention. just observing the sweet incoming breath and the warm outgoing breath. Become aware of the pulsation of your heart. A thump, thump, thump beat flowing from your heart and pulsating through the entire body. The breath is gentle. The mind is relaxed. The heartbeat pulsating in its own rhythm. Prepare to come out of this part of the meditation. We'll do another at the back end of this talk. As you're coming out of this meditation, I'd like you to once again bring back your attention to the avocado on my table, now in my hand. Just think about this hard, grenade-like object when bought from the store not more than 10 minutes ago. The question I'd like you to think about is, what ripens the avocado? How does this cold, hard object sit on your kitchen table, and then after days, it's soft and ripe and sweet? What ripens the avocado? Is it some radio technology? Is it some timer? Is it just random? Now blinking, open your eyes if you like, and I'm sorry to report that church magic has not yet ripened. It'll take a few weeks, maybe 120 years to ripen. So this sense that the universe has order, things seem to have their own rhythm. Days are followed by nights, nights are followed by days, weeks are followed by months, and the stars move, the sun moves, everything moves, and Jupiter takes 120 years to cycle around the sun 10 times. All of those things are rhythmic. And in the Hindu tradition, our earliest poems, our earliest memories are just a state of wonder. Not, of course, about this unripe avocado, but the fact that there is some sense of order, rhythm in this universe. And they asked, what explains all this rhythm? Why do things work the way they do? And they asked this question with deep research. They look at the stars, they look at the patterns in the stars. They observe the planets moving and they observe the patterns of the planets. And over decades and centuries, they're still observing. And they notice that the rhythm continues. And the question is, what explains the rhythm? And so the earliest prayers in the Hindu tradition are from meditative sages who, in this state of meditation, with a soft gaze, the eyes are not yet full open, you begin to observe things. And in this state, halfway between sleep and waking, you're beginning to observe the universe and things begin to make sense. The patterns seem to come together. A lot of intuitive faculties are available to observe all this and to see what's going on. And they observe that this entire universe seems to be a whole organic being itself. Purusha, they called him. The entire creation. They are not yet talking about a God in that sense, or many gods as you might think of in Hinduism. They're simply saying that all of this universe seems to be one singularity, one singular entity, one singular being in a state of continuous movement. And so the first hymn in the Hindu tradition is the Purusha Sukta. And the Purusha Sukta says all of this, everything is him, everything is Purusha, everything is is the dance of the divine, whatever that is. And their first question is, who is this? What is this? And their answers were, we don't know. It's hard to tell. We don't know who it is because we can't go that far. And but that sense of this underlying unity of all creation, underlying unity of everything, the underlying rhythm that seems to move the entire universe is central to the experience of Hinduism. And these were the earliest thoughts that came in a meditative state. Later on, when we started, our eyes began to settle, we look at the night sky and we look at the stars, we observe the movement of the stars, we take notes. So the astrology in the Hindu tradition is very deep, like the Greek system and the other systems, very deep astrology, a deep understanding of the zodiac, the constellations, the planetary movements. And that requires long periods of peace, long periods of gathering data, building of infrastructure, buildings, and architecture to capture all this data. Where does the sun rise? Where does it set? What time of day? When are the eclipses? And so on. And that gave them a capacity for pattern seeking and pattern finding over several centuries, that there are patterns in the universe. And this pattern has an interesting capacity. There's an interesting trend in that pattern. And that they came out with a very simple formulation, which was the sacrifice itself. Not sacrifice as in take a lamb and sacrifice the lamb itself, but sacrifice as in the act of creation is an act of sacrifice. And so the early hymns are about Purusha, the cosmic being, sacrificing himself in order to create. And so sacrifice creates the order. Order creates abundance. And so these are times that are highly abundant. So they are very affluent, very rich, and they're seeing that all this abundance requires some sort of societal order, not just in the stars, but within the society, within families. And so that order, it requires sacrifice at an individual level. If you look at what's happening in the modern times, we have stopped this capacity for sacrifice. So everyone pursues their own passions. Everyone pursues their own interests. In a family, if you pursue your own interests, then the family doesn't make sense. It doesn't stick together. And so families begin to unravel because this sense of sacrifice that a family unit calls for or a country unit calls for is no longer being observed. And so sacrifice creates the order. But that order is what's required to create the abundance. For all the wealth that we've created, it requires an order in society. And so this essential formulation was an early finding in the Hindu tradition, and all the abundance related. So the visit to the temple that you saw, you would have seen a lot of color, a lot of dancing and singing, and a lot of joy. It's because we celebrate abundance, but that abundance requires sacrifice. And then a lot of the ritualistic aspects of the Hindu tradition are essentially the sacrifice. Again, not of creatures. There have been, of course, creature sacrifice, animal sacrifices, but for most of the thousands of years subsequently, the sacrifice is the sacrifice of the self, personal ego. Because when you sacrifice the personal ego through surrender, through an act of devotion, through an act of committing to society or to a higher self, that sacrifice creates all the abundance in the society. And all of that abundance is, of course, what created the Hindu tradition. As the eyes begin to settle in the night, we see the night sky, we see the stars and the movements, we see the patterns. And we begin to see the forces at work that we don't control. You, for example, cannot control your heartbeat. I cannot control the growing of the hair on my head. If I did, I'd have a very nice thick head of hair, but I don't because, of course, there are some patterns I don't control. Most patterns are autonomous; they work on their own. And so this understanding that there are patterns at work, forces at play, began to be an important part of the Hindu tradition there, where these forces must be given names. Fire, for example, is an important force because it helps to digest. And in the Hindu tradition, the fire also plays the role of transmitting information from this plane to the higher plane. So fire is often a vehicle for sacrifice. We have herbs and offerings that we pour into the sacrificial fire, and the mantras, the chanting that we do, all the prayers that we're pouring into the fire, and fire then transmits it to higher dimensions. So fire had to be given a name. And so Agni was the name for fire. The winds are important. Vayu is the name for winds. The rains are important. And the rain god, of course, is Indra. That is the bringer of rains, which are so important for a water-dependent agrarian agricultural society. And so all the forces of nature began to have names, began to have forms. And then our sense of sacrifice begins to now focus on how to cajole and control and invite and invoke these powers, these forces. And so the mantras were invented, chants, sacrificial chants, where you would chant in a particular manner. And then in that manner, you're beginning to invoke this particular force. And then you try to control them by offering them gifts, by offering them praise, by lavishing a lot of praise on them, and then requesting the things that we wish to request. So the forces of nature, they have a name now, they have mantras and incantations associated with them, and a lot of rituals associated with them. Later, they acquired form. Fire is imagined as having seven tongues of fire, and each tongue with its own name and its own color and its own dimension. More and more vivid, more and more colorful, more and more poignant, but symbolic in many cases, descriptions. So, for example, the thumping of the heartbeat and the pulsation of the universe itself. The Shiva is seen sitting, not unlike this, sitting in a meditative trance, and he has a little drum, hand drum, damru, and he is beating his drum, and that's pulsating the cosmic dance of this universe. Lakshmi, the goddess of wealth and abundance, is seen sitting in this kind of pose on a lotus. She's sitting on a lotus because the lotus grows in ponds, grows in dirty water, or not necessarily clean water, right? But out of this chaos, out of the froth and the foaming of the markets, out of that chaos, wealth and abundance come out of that. And that lotus represents all the abundance that comes out of the movements of the market. And so Lakshmi is seen, visualized, sitting on a lotus, in also a lotus pose, in a grand, she's got a hand up, she's got this in one hand, and she's giving out gold coins. And so very vivid descriptions of the divine form, very vivid and very human-like descriptions, because we also realize in the Gita, one of the sacred scripture in the Hindu tradition, it's a conversation between two people, one human and one God incarnate. And he says, which is the right form of worship? Is it selfless service? Do I say, I love the universe, I want to do everything for the universe? Or would a form be very helpful? Which is the right way of worship? And Krishna, God incarnate, says, well, both are really good. This is the consulting, it depends answer. Both are great, but the human mind finds it impossible to embrace the universe as a shapeless, selfless, formless, qualityless feature. Because how do you say you love the universe? That too is a name. And we know this because we give hurricanes names. because the hurricanes don't care to have a name. They don't get called Rita or Katrina. We call them names so we can talk about them. And so the names of the divine become important in the Hindu tradition because by those names, their properties are known to us. We know they are abundant. We know they are angry sometimes. We know that they are easy to please. These are all names of the divine. Shiva himself, the name means that which makes everything sacred. Vishnu means that which pervades everything. Usually in the talk demonstration I bring the avocado, which is one. I also bring along a very sweet Indian confection. And it's essentially something that's made of flour and yogurt, but it's fried in oil, but then dipped in syrup. And it's super sweet. I wouldn't recommend this. But it's very tasty. I do high school classes with those, and it's always a hit because kids can consume all that sugar. I certainly cannot, but I just, But the point is, when the flour thingy is dipped in syrup, that syrup now is infused into the entirety of that flour shape, right? It's a pretzel-like shape. And so Vishnu means that which pervades everything. Everything, you and me included, are pervaded by Vishnu. So the names have a meaning to us. And so as our eyes begin to settle into the machinations and the operations of the universe, our names and forms and shapes of the divine become more and more intricate. Stories begin to evolve. Vishnu now has a spouse, consort. She is Lakshmi, the goddess of wealth. Vishnu himself, we imagine him to be sitting in the high heavens or in a higher realm for sure, half asleep. He's lying down on the cosmic serpent, he's just relaxing, and he's half asleep in a state of yoga nidra. He's not asleep, he's not awake, he is in a dream sleep. And that dream is what we are all experiencing. We are in that dream. And that's how we understand reality itself, because for example, we all dream. You dream, I dream, but we see other people in the dreams. And the question that you should ask, I invite all of you to think about when you wake up is, all right, so what have I done to all the other people I met in the dream? I had arguments with them. I made love to them. I had great conversations with them. I walked with them. But what happened to them? I'm here. But what happened to those people? When you wake out of your dream. And what we realized is that when we wake out of the dream, we realize one very simple thing. We commit an act of sacrifice in the dream, which is we choose to playfully forget ourselves. That's a sacrifice. We say, all right, I'm me, but I'm also her, him, her, and so on. I pretend to be other people in order to have an interesting dream. But when I've woken up, it's just the dreamer that remains. And so the way we understand Vishnu is he is the original dreamer who is dreaming all of us. We are all Vishnu. We are all in Vishnu's dream. And so each of ourselves is the same creator himself. In fact, the way our cosmology of creation, depending on which school of thought you go in the Hindu tradition, even the creator of this universe, and before Marvel movies, we believed in multiverses. So this particular universe is one of infinite numbers of universes. But the creator of this universe also, he comes out of Vishnu's navel. There's a lotus that comes out of his navel. And then from that lotus emerges Brahma, four-headed. Our universe is created by a four-headed creator in all directions. And he wakes up and he gets no instructions. As it turns out, they used to send instruction booklets earlier, but they've stopped sending those. So he wakes up and he does not know what's going on. So he then hears two words, meditate. The Sanskrit word for that is tapa, meditate. So all he does is he meditates. And then when he meditates, he realizes, okay, my task is to create. And so then he goes about the task of creating the universe. And then his entire cosmology of creation and so on. Amazing, beautiful stories, many of which make no sense to the modern world. But most of them are symbolic in nature because they're transmitting a lot of information. And the way I do that, I've done this in several talks here. Can someone finish the sentence for me, please? With great power
Great responsibility.
comes great responsibility. Now, why do you know that? It's Spider-Man's
heard
uncle.
that.
Spider-Man's uncle was dying.
Uncle
Uncle Ben was
Spider-Man.
the Spider-Man's uncle Ben was dying, and those were his famous last words. It's the origin story for Spider-Man because he had great power. He was not ready to take great responsibility, but he said, Peter, with great power comes great responsibility. On that very profound message, you remember you've forgotten the story. But the story allows the profound message to travel over long periods of time. Generation after generation, the same stories can be repeated because they're interesting. So the epics in the Hindu tradition, the Ramayana, for example, or Mahabharata, two huge epics, story after story, embedded inside each other. And each of those stories is a story of what does it mean to live a moral and ethical life. But they're not morality tales, unlike the sort of Judeo-Christian traditions. We don't have a list of rules to adhere to. It's not as if we have the Ten Commandments. Why? Because, like I said earlier, it depends. If we were given 10 commandments, that we'd also have a whole legal structure that says, comma, and here's a few reasons why you may not apply this. You may not kill except in the following circumstances, followed by a long paragraph of circumstantial situations under which you may covet your neighbor's wife. I'm not sure what those might be, but the point is, it doesn't come with a set of rules because space, time, and context are always changing. You cannot create rules for a society which is in flux because the rules are then going to become the things that will hang the society with because it holds the society from continuing to evolve. So instead of giving rules, they told us stories so that we may infer our own rules from the stories. So the story of Ram, which is the older story of Ramayana, is really just a story about one simple choice. The choice is the choice between Shreyas and Preyas, which is the choice between doing the right thing and the sweet thing. And the reason Ram's story in Ramayana is told to us is that here's a person who he's a young prince at the time the story begins, and through the entire arc of his life, he comes to many points in his life when he has to make a choice. And the choice is always, here's the hard choice, and here's a very sweet choice. You're going to love it. And guess what he does? Always makes the hard choices. And he makes those hard choices at tremendous cost to himself. He loses his father, his wife, his kids, his brother. He loses every one of them. But all the time, he says, my responsibility as a prince or as the son of my father is to, for example, uphold my father's promises. He'd love it if I don't leave, but he's made a promise to someone that I must leave. So guess what? I'm going to leave because it's the right thing for my father's promises to be upheld, even though I need to leave home and I need to leave the kingdom. So he makes a hard choice. And his father's all crying. He, in fact, dies out of grief because he didn't want that. But he makes a tough choice. And repeatedly through the rest of his life, he comes at these points and he always makes a choice which is hard. Why? Because when they started to write the story, they explained why the story must be written. And the question was, morals in the society are declining. People are making self-serving choices. How may we hold people up to a higher standard? And then a divine visitation comes to the author. And he says, well, you should check in on this guy a few miles south of you, this young kid. You should trace his story. So he begins to write the story in the same time. He says, there's a young man not quite south of here, and he is doing this. And so the story is told of this young man because he makes the hard choices. And it's such a lovely story that even now, several thousands of years later, this is celebrated. But it's a reminder of not making the easy choice. It's a reminder of making the hard choices because, again, sacrifice creates order, order creates abundance. Right? And so the stories become an important part of the Hindu tradition. The festivals in the Hindu tradition tend to look at the stars, they look at the stories and the region and whatever's going on there, and an intermixing of all of these. The same festival in India may be held on different days. Of course, that happens with the lunar calendar and the solar calendar. The Hindu calendar is a luni solar calendar, it's a mix of both. But not just that, the same festival in India will have different backstories every 30, 50, 100 miles. They'll just have a completely different explanation for why this festival exists. They'll do the same thing, it'll just be for a different reason. So it's really interesting. But the point is, it's always woven into the local fabric, whatever's happening in the local region. And that's the interesting part. So it's a tradition that comes out of abundance, long periods of abundance, but it's a tradition that evolves out of a long meditative practice, because all these observations happen over a long patient period of just observing and being. And so out of this silence comes this entire rich and very chaotic but very abundant religion, which we know as Hinduism. So we're up at time and we have 15 minutes. We could do another meditation or we could do Q&A, whatever you like.
Meditation.
A couple of questions and then meditation. How's that? So we get everyone gets happy. Any questions that come to your mind?
Yes, when you're talking about sacrifice, many religions have fasting as part of that. Is that part of the Hindu tradition as well?
Yes, very deeply, yes. Fasting is, there are several types of fasting. There's the once a week type thing where depending on the deity, you'll fast on that day. You're gonna, which is, typically, that's one. Then there's times of the year. So there's the 9 days of the Mother Goddess. Just a few weeks ago, we did twice a year, 4 times a year, but 2 times are more popular. 9 days, people will be, some people will have no food at all. Some people will have no water at all for some part of their time, but no food for sure. And some people will skip some foods and have the others. So depend, your mileage may vary. And so Prime Minister Modi of India, this was funny because this created some sort of a state issue where he was visiting a few years ago, but it was October and it was the 9 days of fasting and he tends to fast. So there's a state banquet in his honor. So, at the White House.
Oh, no.
But what are you going to feed a guy who's not having anything?
Right.
So they had to do something, but they did fine. The point was, fasting is a very good core part of the tradition. Fasting is generally, done. For example, I'll give you another example. Fasting cleanses the channels inside, and so, for example, at the wedding of your children, the girl's father is going to be fasting, like no food fasting, because they need to be in a very heightened, purified state. So so that happens. And of course, the bride and groom, thanks to the extremely long, big fat Indian weddings, they tend to not eat till like 4 in the morning. But that's just a different thing. Yeah. But fasting is a very important part of the tradition.
I thought so. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
It seems like your stories and how important they are to kind of transmit morality is very similar to what in the Christian faith we have parables that come out of the Bible. The various monastic faiths have parables that are spoken.
Yes.
And it seems as though there's a direct comparison there.
Yes, parables for sure, but not merely spoken by divine, like enlightened prophets or divine beings. The stories tend to be really interesting because the understanding in the Hindu tradition is that the right thing to do depends on space, time, and context, and context differs from person to person. So the epics tend to have extremely interesting conversations between completely random things. There's one really interesting morality conversation between, I'll give you an example. So there's a pond, but it's got poisoned water. And the poisoned water, the controller of the pond, the owner of that pond, is a crane. The crane is a divine being, and he owns this pond. And so this king with his four brothers all drink the water and they die. And the crane says, look, if you need the water, you got to talk to me, answer my questions. You answer them, you can drink the water. You don't answer them, you'll die, like your brothers did. And seeing that his four brothers have already died, he says, well, I'm not sure if I should take any chances. He says, fine, why don't we talk? And then this is a conversation. It's called Baka Yudhishthira Samvad. And it's amazing because one of the questions, he asks a series of questions and gets a series of answers. One of the questions is amazing. He says, what is surprise? Or what is surprising? And what Yudhishthira says, I know it says, Kim Ascharya, what is surprising? And Yudhishthira, the king, he said, well, prince in this case, at this point, he said, well, you know what surprising is? Every day we see people die. Every day we see people die. And yet none of us thinks that we're going to die. That's surprising. Right? And so you can see how this isn't about just like the moral or ethical values. It's also a deep philosophical insight just baked into this. Another conversation is between a young boy, and the Lord of Death. Because as it turns out, his father is a stingy guy and he's giving away poor cattle at a family function thing. He says, well, why are you giving the thin cows? Why don't you give the fat cows? He says, well, and so he says, who are you going to give me to? I'm your thin, little younger child. He says, I'll give you to death. So he says, well, you give me to death. All right, fine. So he goes to death's door because it's his father's orders. And he sits and waits there. It's not his time. So he waits for 3 days. And then the Lord of Death returns. He says, well, I'm sorry you had to wait. What's going on? Well, how may I help you? He says, well, I'm here because my father sent me to you. He says, well, I have no need for you. You're too young. Just go back. He says, but since you spent 3 days, I'll give you 3 wishes. He said, ask for anything. Kingdom, money, you got it. No problem. Just name it. I can give you anything you want. He says, well, being that I see that people that come here have already died and, they've lost everything that you gave them, it doesn't seem very useful to get all the kingdom and wealth. Why don't you tell me what happens after death? And this conversation is quite deep because now he's saying, well, I can't really tell you. Ask for something else. And so so they have this conversation. So the stories are almost, they're really multifaceted and varied. It's just a lot of different textures.
So the stories are more than morality.
No.
They're just kind of reflections of life. Is that what you're
They
saying?
could be reflections of life, the true nature of reality, a whole bunch of things. And it could be a lot of philosophical insights. And when I give longer talks, as this is turning out to be, I say, you may remember, what duck and cover is. Duck and cover, right? And we're under this table. Why were you taught duck and cover? Because of the Cold War and the atomic weapon, right? Right?
Thanks.
Right? And so the point is, why were we taught duck and cover? Because of E equals MC squared. Some of you might be scientists, just being Livermore, but not everyone can understand the science, but everyone can understand duck and cover. And so a lot of the stories were simplified, popularized version, bless you, of deep philosophical insight that you may or may not understand, but the stories are interesting. And then over several generations, somebody else might come along, and then, the key turns in their brain, and now they get it. They understand, oh, this is what they meant. But for those intervening generations, they just had an interesting story. And that's just the way this thing was done. Yes, sir.
Question. I think you wrote a book recently on globalization, the age of destruction and disruption, right?
Thank you for remembering, yes.
So I was thinking of, thank you for your presentation, the notion of sacrifice in our contemporary world seems it's all about, clumsy word, individuation,
Yes.
the self. With the current world, has extreme wealth inequality, extreme wealth. As we sit here, it's getting more extreme.
As of today morning, worse.
So I really want to, the tension I'm feeling is in this paradigm that's sacrifice starts with sacrifice, which leads to order and abundance. But our world seems more and more less sacrifice, more striving, more instrumentality, much more in the current environment, transactional as opposed to relational. And so it seems like the forces in our world today are in opposition to what you're describing.
Yes.
So how do you fix that?
We're all here in this room. We are fixing that by just being, being present here, being open to hearing me, if someone not from your faith, talk about my faith. The fact that you're open means that your heart is connected, means that you want to hear. That is an act of sacrifice. You're not here to proselytize. We are not here to proselytize. We are still engaging with each other, and that's important. People like us exist. And so we won't become individualized to the point of extinction. In the Hindu tradition, we have long memories, and a lot of times, some of our stories are actually about runaway power. And then, God has to intervene and just, do something about it. I'm actually quite optimistic, and Hindus in general tend to be quite optimistic. We're not very doomsday people because it's all cyclical. So we will get to over-individuation, but guess what? We all know is leading to more loneliness, poorer health, poorer society, worse air quality, worse climate. It's bad on all the parameters that you care to ask. We're going to realize that this overemphasis on the individual isn't helping, right? And then the pendulum will swing back. And then we will have more order again. And that's why we're doing this is why I do what I do. This is why I think we're all doing what we're doing, which is, I think we believe in the act of being together in a society. It requires us to hold our own individuality, but also respect the other. And that's an important, type of society we want to build. And that's the American dream, right? Which is we're not blended into one sameness.
Could the Interfaith Interconnect structure or existence be a mechanism for facilitating or accelerating sort of a desired future in terms of these kind of resisting forces, distraction, destruction, transactional, instrumental individuation, as opposed to relational kind of way of being? I mean, do you see possibilities for this organization in some embryonic experimental way, perhaps, to be a vehicle for a better way of being, if you will?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the fact that we're having this conversation, in this church, right, is it's important for us to do this more of, because it allows us to connect with each other and allows us to recognize, what's good in your tradition versus my tradition, and learn from each other. It's great. Mm-hmm. I think the over-individuation is a problem that every church I know is feeling, because, the people have stopped visiting. And the sense of community, the sense of belonging that this stake, for example, would radiate to members of this community is not being experienced, right? And that is fragmenting the society, right? So I actually don't, there's this ideal of a religion-free society, but religion means to bind together, right? If there's a binding-free society, what use is this society to begin with? Right? It's a bad society. I think society exists to create a comfortable mental space for us, emotional states for us to be in, to share in our sorrows, to participate in our joys, and so on. That's what community does. What we can do is, I think, radiate this sense of community, this sense that we're better together, vibrant, because out of this sacrifice comes the order, and then from that order comes abundance. All the ideas, we can't have ideas if we all think the same way, right? And that's why you need interactivity, not a blending into sameness, but having, so in the Hindu tradition, the opposing party is a very important part where we want the opposing party to be strong as well, because that forces us to be better, and together we create something. In fact, the goddess of wealth in the original stories, she emerges from this churning of the milk ocean, but the churning is done by the beings of light and the beings of darkness working together. It turns out they have to work together to churn. They're churning. They take the cosmic plane, the big Mount Meru, and they're churning the ocean, and then the goddess of wealth emerges out of that. And so the point is that I think we need this churning of conversation, this churning of thoughts, this engagement is important, because it allows us to once again have hope for the future. Because otherwise, if we just give up and say, well, we're over individual, rich are going to get richer, poor are going to get poorer, we'll send you money, and then you have no purpose. What kind of society is that? It's not a very vibrant or thriving or interesting society, I feel. So I think creating that thriving conversation is a good thing. And I think more people, now this is not very well attended, right? But if you had more and more people coming to these, because it's important, not in a cynical way, but in a way to understand and to just be challenged. Even the challenge is good, because then it'll make us think about something that we didn't know about earlier. So thank you for the question. No time for the second meditation.
I guess not.
Thank you.
Thank you.